looking into some developments from the continent at large now. More than 18 million registered voters are expected to cast their ballots in Ghana on December 7th. The battle for the top job is between Vice President Mahamudu Bawumia from the ruling New Patriotic Party and John Mahama from the National Democratic Congress, who served as Ghana's president between 2013 and 2017. Jervin Naidoo, political analyst at Oxford Economics Africa, joins us now to unpack how the NDC and NPP intend to address Ghana's pressing challenges. Jervin, thanks so much for joining us today. So we're edging closer to the election day in Ghana. 12 parties running, but it's really a tight race between the ruling party, the NPP, and the opposition party, the NDC. As we get started, just lay the ground for us here, providing an overview of the key issues in this critical election.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a very important election in Africa, and particularly in West Africa. I just want to start with that context, considering the prevalence or the growth of the junta-led states, the AES states, that have been now taken over as coup. So the democracy in Ghana is very, very important for us. So I think that's an important thing to take note of. But the main issue that most Ghanaians are concerned about is the cost of living crisis. The value in which the cedi, the purchasing power of the cedi, those are the key issues. And like here in South Africa, we have issues with Eskom, or at least for now, Eskom is stabilized. Ghana has had chronic power cuts since 2011 in Akan, one of the local languages called Damiso. It means on and off. It's significantly impacting the economy. So those are some of the key issues that Ghanaians are really, really concerned about. And both the NDC and NPP, on my reading of their manifestos, and I follow it quite closely. It's one of my countries I follow very closely here at Oxford. Both have solutions, but they go about getting the solutions in different ways. So yeah, those are the key big ticket issues that you would normally associate in any election.
And that brings me to my next questions around the campaigns of both the parties. As you mentioned, both focusing on that economic recovery, how to address unemployment and the cost of living prices. When looking at some of the polls, it seems like the opposition party is set to win about 52% of the vote, and the ruling party looks to gain just about 40% of the vote. Jervin, talk to me about what the macroeconomic environment would look like if either party was to win.
Yeah, sure. That's a very important question. Here at Oxford Economics Africa, we did an extensive research briefing, which is freely accessible, in which we looked at the different models and how each party would govern. So in our baseline scenario, which we think is going to happen, which the NDC under former President Mahama is going to win, the economy will grow around 4.6 per annum over the next 3 to 4 years, whereas under the NDC, under Mr. Bawumia, it'll be 4.5. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but the key thing here, the key takeaways, I don't think many people think about this or know about this, but Ghana is constricted by the IMF program, which ends in 2026. So whoever wins has to balance that out, right? But then back to the first part of your question, the NDC, the NPP, let me start with them, Mr. Mahama, they're very much a center-left party. So the way they're going to stimulate the economy is looking at increasing the social safety net, providing funding for smaller businesses, and basically propping up the social aspect of the economy and hoping that will boost jobs. Whereas the NPP, a center-right party, advocates for more businesses, more private sector development. So they're both going to generate growth. But they're going about it in completely different ways. And I just think that based on the trend in Africa, as we're seeing, where we in South Africa, in our neighboring Botswana, Mozambique, Mauritius, incumbent parties are suffering across the continent. They're either losing or getting booted out of power. And I think that's going to maintain the same in Ghana. I think the NDC are likely to be, and as you mentioned, they're polling quite well.
And you touched on the Ghana agreement with the IMF. There's been a recent approval for the third review of its $3 billion lending program with the institution. How might this impact the upcoming elections and, the implications of their economic prospects on the back of this?
Yeah, so it won't have an immediate impact on the consumer on the ground. It's more of a long-term impact. But the thing is, as you and I would know, as an ordinary citizen, you don't necessarily care about what your country is going to look like. Yes, you do care what your country is going to look like in 5 to 10 years for your children's sake, but you're worried about what's going to happen now. So I think a lot of voters are concerned about what's happening now. Can my city get me more value? Can I afford basic necessities? And the thing is with the NDC, they're really pushing the social narrative. They're saying they might get rid of some certain taxes on essential items, like bread and meat, reduce the cost of living. So overall, that IMF program will have a long-term impact on growth, but in the short term, it's not going to really do too much. And I do think, though, that whoever wins needs to pay very careful attention to what happened in Kenya, where a lot of people blame the difficulties, the protests in June and July, not just on the government, but on the IMF's doorsteps as well. So there's also this little balancing act, you've got to please the IMF, but you also have to please your own people. So whoever comes is going to really have to find a nice, solid balance between the two.
Jervin, before I let you go, we've had, this year's been just a year of elections, and we've had really big elections in Africa as well. You touched on it. We had the South African election, we had Botswana, we also saw Mozambique, and we saw the outcomes quite positive, some outcomes quite negative with protests outbreak there in Mozambique. Talk to me about the importance of the Ghanaian election, especially when it comes to democracy and where Ghana stands as a democratic country, considering that we've seen a lot of military coups take place within the West African region.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a good point. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important just for Africa, for West Africa and ECOWAS, especially ECOWAS, which has been faced with the alliance of states, the AES states. It's really important because also Ghana, generally speaking, I would say, barring the exception of Mauritius and recently in Botswana, where we had a successful transition of power, Ghana has successfully transitioned of power since 1992. So they easily transfer power, and it's a bastion of democracy for continent struggles with this concept to a certain extent. And I'm quite optimistic about Ghana. I do think the elections will go well. There are some concerns with the IEC that the NDC have been mentioning, but I don't think they are as serious as what the NDC says. So I do think it's very important that these elections go well, because if they don't go well and there are issues, violence or undermining of the result, doesn't look good for West Africa. And look, in West Africa, there are only two solid democracies there, being Ghana and Nigeria, were two of the big powerhouses, not just in Africa, but not just in West Africa, but the continent. So I'm quite optimistic. I love Ghana. I cover it quite extensively, and I'm very optimistic about the country. And whoever wins, I think there's some good potential. I think Ghana's over the most difficult parts of the last couple of years. I think there's good potential in the country. That's my overall consensus on the economic and political situation.
Jervin, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time and insights. We'll be watching things very closely following the election on Saturday. That was Oxford Economics Africa's political analyst, Jervin Naidoo.